Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the OASFAA Counselor Workshop in November 2024. Thank you for being here today. My name is Morley Keller, and I'm a senior consultant with the National College Attainment Network. And my co-presenter today is Missy Bondi Hasselback from the University of Dayton. And we are going to try to cover an immense amount of information for you today in this 2-hour webinar. We strongly, strongly, strongly encourage you to type your questions into the Q&A box today. We have two stellar financial aid folks who are on the webinar as well, who will monitor the Q&A box and try to answer all your questions. Because with us trying to get 168 slides in 120 minutes, like I said, we're going to talk really, really fast and not sure that we're going to have much time at all to answer questions at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. Both the individual deck and the recording will be placed up on the counselor webpage for OASFAA, your counselor resource page, so you will be able to find it there after today's presentation. So at this point, I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint, and we're going to try to get the webinar started. We are going to go off screen so that you can concentrate on the information that we have up on the screen and not really worry about us. So let me get my camera turned off there. Okay, there we go. All right. So as I said, here we are today with the OASFAA Counselor Workshop. Just a reminder about this presentation, or if you download the deck, you're welcome to do so. We want people to have it, but please remember to leave it with the OASFAA logo and the information so that folks know where the information came from. We do have breaking news. We're going to start with breaking news. Maybe many of you saw it last week, but on Thursday, November 22nd, Federal Student Aid officially opened the FAFSA for all students around the country. Earlier that week, they made an announcement on Monday the 18th that they opened an expanded beta testing, because they've been beta testing this fall, to everyone. And in a sense, Wednesday, they moved out of beta testing and into the form officially being open. So your students can have all the fun that they want, perhaps over this holiday break, getting their FAFSAs filed. Our agenda today, we're going to cover a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about any changes and enhancements there are for next year. We're going to talk about the FSA-ID. We're going to talk about dependency circumstances and parent of record, in other words, who belongs on the FAFSA. We're going to walk you through the 25-26 FAFSA. We're going to look at some things that occurred as a result of simplification. We're going to cover federal aid programs, Ohio aid programs, financial aid notifications, and share resources with you. So let's talk quickly about some of the changes and enhancements for this coming year. As we just mentioned, the form opened last Thursday. It is really a clone of the 24-25 FAFSA in terms of the questions are identical. However, they have worked on improving the instructions and enhancing the help text to help people navigate the form. They continue to work on technology enhancements to resolve known issues. There are likely to still be some issues when, as this form opens, it's not going to be perfect. There will continue to be a known issues page. And, as those things get resolved, that will be notified on that page. The beta testing happened in October and November. Literally thousands and thousands of students tested the form, and it allowed Federal Student Aid to fix a lot of the bugs. So the user experience should be better this coming year. There is a website, and we have the link in the resources today that would show you the report of the testing progress and how many students did it and how many colleges were involved, etc. There is a new tool that we want to point out, and we'll have the link in the resource section as well, called Who's My Parent? This is a tool. These questions are certainly still inside the FAFSA, but Federal Student Aid created this standalone tool for a student who's maybe not sure which parent or parents are to be reported on the FAFSA, that they can use the Who's My Parent tool to understand which parent or parents should be securing an FSA ID so that they can enter their information into the FAFSA. They've added some additional messaging and pop-up boxes, particularly around the unsub-only loan question to reduce errors. We had a lot of students last year who checked yes, that they wanted to be considered for an unsub-only loan. And when that happens, they're considered independent, and the parent section information wasn't collected, and that's not exactly what they meant. And so that took a lot of fixing down the road. Contributors who without an SSN will need to set up their FSA ID again, but the identity verification process has been waived for the 25-26 cycle, so they can set up their FSA ID. And at this point, we recommend that they don't even necessarily follow through with submitting the identity documents that have been requested. We kind of are in a wait and see mode, and if it kicks back in for next year, maybe eventually they'll have to supply their ID documents, but we suggest that they don't even do that right now. There is a financial aid estimator tool out there, and the link will also be in the resources, to reflect the 25-26 SAI formula. So if you've got senior parents who want to check something out, or even families of younger students who might want to know what their SAI may be, you can refer them to the estimator. FSA is in the process of enhancing a lot of how-to documents and videos and getting everything updated for 25-26. We'll share some of that stuff on the OASFAA counselor resource page. Federal Student Aid has increased staffing at the call center by more than 80%. They've almost doubled their staff. We do understand last week, when that FAFSA, in a sense, was open to all during beta testing, and the first couple days of the FAFSA being open, that call center wait times were a minute or less, which is amazingly different than the experience last year. Because they had to clone the 24-25 form and not do any new programming, your current college students won't have a much shortened renewal form. They'll in a sense be filling out the 25-26 FAFSA, pretty much answering all the questions that are on the form. The
Hey,
paper
Morley.
Yes.
Sorry to break in. Just wanted to remind all of the participants to use the Q&A box and not the chat feature. So if you go down to the bottom, you can see the box with a question mark and Q&A. That's where you're going to want to ask all of your questions, and the slides will be available on the site after the presentation. So
All right.
thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Emily. Okay. Just want to remind folks that also last week, the paper FAFSA became available. Obviously, it should be the last choice. Hopefully, maybe if we have people who are having a tremendous issues with creating an FSA ID, they may want to attempt to use the paper form, but the processing time is slower. It won't be anything like last year, where it was literally months and months and months. It will get processed quicker than last year. But for those that do have a social security number, whether that's maybe the student who uses the form, their identity will still be verified. The non-social security number folks will have their identity verification process waived for the year. Just to share a little bit about numbers and how your class did last year, as of November 15th, the class of 2024 nationally was 8.7% behind in the number of FAFSAs filed compared to the class of 23. Only about 53.8% of the seniors around the country filed a FAFSA for 24-25. Ohio's senior class completion rate is 53.9%, which means we're down 6,800 FAFSAs compared to the previous year. So Ohio is kind of right in line with what the national average is. Ohio Department of Higher Education has awarded some FAFSA 25 grants. Many of you may have had some conversation with the agencies or a person assigned in your area to help increase FAFSA completion for the class of 25. The other thing we want to make sure is that everybody has set their district up to be able to receive the student level reports that include student names when they've completed the FAFSA. Ohio, I'm not sure how soon it will start for 25-26. We anticipate sometime in December. Folks like the colleges, the state agencies, et cetera, will begin to get those first files that have information about which students have completed the 25-26 FAFSA, and that will include any student that was in beta testing all the way through since it opened. Just to let you know who are the leaders around the country in terms of highest rates, Ohio is 20th around the country, both in FAFSA completion and in a sense, the smallest change from last year. We're down about 8.9% from last year. So those are what the numbers look like. Going to talk about specific areas of the FAFSA to highlight before we walk you through the entire form. One of the questions is about family size. And as you know, family size is now determined on the FAFSA based on the number of exemptions that were claimed on tax returns that were brought over. However, there's many situations where the number of people being supported in the household does not exactly match the FAFSA, or I'm sorry, the tax form exemptions. So if you need to change the family size, if it is different than the number of exemptions that were claimed on the 23 tax return, you're going to want to say yes. And down in this box circled at the bottom, in the green box in the middle, it tells you how many exemptions basically were brought over. One parent, a parent, spouse, and the student. So this had 3 exemptions on this tax form. If, for example, there were really 5 people in the household that were being supported by the parents who meet the criteria, then an additional number 2 should be placed in that box at the bottom, which would then change the family size to 5. The types of people who can be included in the household size are the student siblings. If they live with their parent, receive more than half of their support, and they're going to continue to receive that support during this year. Other persons who may live in the household, again, if they live with the parents, the student's parents, they receive more than half of their support, and they're going to continue to be there throughout the academic year. For independent students, it's the student and spouse if they're married. If the student has a dependent child, the student has to live with them. They have to provide more than half of their support and going to be there during the award year. Again, other people, if the dependent student has other folks that live with them, that they're providing more than half their support and will continue during the award year, they could be counted in an independent student's household size. As we all know, granting consent from the IRS for tax filers or non-tax filers is required. Everybody has to grant consent, or the student will not be eligible for any federal aid. The IRS will confirm if the information is available and bring it over. It will also confirm if the person is not a tax filer, which hopefully would reduce verification burden in the future. The contributors without an SSN will also need to grant consent, but they will have to manually enter their information into the form. All right, let's talk a little bit about the FSA ID. It's been around, it's still here. They have to set up their studentaid.gov account, or the FSA ID as we refer to it. They need a username and password. It cannot be the same, different usernames, different passwords for everybody who has an FSA ID. Those folks who do not have a social security number will also set up an FSA ID. The verification process, though, if they do not make it through the TransUnion questions, is waived for the 25-26 year. Setting up an FSA ID does require an email address. We strongly recommend students don't use their high school email address because you all tend to take it away after they graduate. So they should have their own email address that they can use when setting up their FSA ID. A mobile phone number is helpful, but is not required, but is one of the additional ways that you can verify your FSA ID. Every time someone logs in with an FSA ID, it's a multi-factor authentication process. They're going to need to select either getting a code sent to their phone or email, or use an authenticator app. A social security number, email address, and mobile phone number can only be associated with one FSA ID. If the parent or student, spouse, whoever does not have an SSN, you'll need to complete the ID verification. And this is where or you will not need to complete the ID verification, but this is the link where you set up your account. We strongly recommend that you encourage students and parents to get their FSA ID set up anywhere from 3 to 5 days before they would like to do the FAFSA. That way all the FSA IDs are verified and it will enhance the user experience. This is just a screenshot here at studentaid.gov where they can create their account, set up their FSA ID. This is their personal information that they begin to enter on the form. If they do not have a social security number, there'll be a box there that underneath that they'll be able to check. You can create the username, email address, password, etc. All those things, again, have to be unique to each individual user. The password has to be 8 to 30 characters, right? If you haven't created for your students before, make sure you tell students and parents to write down their usernames, their passwords, answers to, security questions, so that in any case that they have to find those, they can get a hold of them and not have to go through the process to try to retrieve usernames and passwords, right? Um, Having a mobile phone is one easier way to do account recovery. If an account is locked out or people are forgetting information for their account. They do get challenge questions, so they should select those and put their answers in again. And as they're writing everything down, write down the answers to their challenge questions. They also will get, if they want to set up an authenticator app, that's another way that they can verify and complete the two multi-step authentication process. So if they want to put an app on their phone, that will work as well. If your email address is provided, a confirmation is sent. It's also sent to the Social Security Administration for those who have a Social Security number. It takes 1 to 3 days. That's why we encourage them to get it set up before they start their FAFSA. Let's talk about dependency status, because that's always an area we get a lot of questions about. If the student, when it comes to the FAFSA, the student can either be considered dependent or independent. If the student is considered dependent by how they answer the questions, the parent information, it may be one or two parents, will also need to provide information on the form. If they're independent, if they're married, perhaps their spouse will also need to provide information. We'll determine that through the student personal circumstances questions and student other circumstances questions. The FAFSA form now has lots of sections that have the word circumstances in the title of the section. Remember things about dependency status. We will already have their birth date when they do their FSA ID. They will answer a question about year in college. They will answer a question about marital status. We will have that. All the dependency questions are in the student personal circumstances section. They'll need to read through those. If none of the list applies to them, they'll check none of the apply at the bottom. If one of the circumstances, however, is an accurate representation for the student and they check the box, they will be considered independent and parent information will not be needed on the form. Here's sort of the standard list: active military duty, veteran of the armed forces, the student has a child or someone else who lives with them and they receive more than half of their support. Was the student since age 13 an orphan? Were they a ward of the court? Were they in foster care? Were they a legally emancipated minor, or are they in a legal guardianship? And let me remind you that legal guardianship is different than legal custody. So you want to make sure that the student actually has guardianship papers. And then if none of these apply, they would check that box. As we indicate, for many of our high school students, many of them are dependent. There also is a question about homelessness. So it's going to ask at any time, are they an unaccompanied youth? Or are they self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? If they answer yes, they may need to gather some documentation to provide to the college from a transitional shelter, a homeless liaison, but perhaps your McKinney-Vento person, the director or designee of a federal Gear Up program, or even a financial aid administrator can, document the situation. Unusual circumstances was sort of a new question on the form last year. This question is really targeted at students that are in a really harsh situation where contacting their parents may, cause harm to them. It could have been they were in a threatening environment, they were abandoned, they're a refugee or asylee from a country, separated from their parent, a human trafficking victim. So these are really extenuating circumstances. And the same process will, follow here as homelessness. If the student answers yes, it would be of their best interest to begin to gather letters or documentation about the unusual circumstances, because 100% of the colleges, when you answer this question yes, are going to follow up and request some documentation about your unusual circumstances. If they answer yes, they will be considered provisionally independent, which means the form will calculate an SAI for them. It will not request any parent information. But as I indicated, all the colleges are going to follow up and verify whether they will continue this to allow the student to remain an independent student, or if the situation does not warrant it, they may choose to return that student to a dependent status, and they may need parent information. They will receive an estimate because they're going to get an SAI on their FAFSA submission summary. They're going to have an estimate of their federal eligibility, may show that they might be eligible for potential Pell Grant and things like that. However, just remember that they are going to need to provide documentation. If they are deemed independent, once they do that, this status would remain for them in future years when they file the FAFSA. We also, unfortunately, have students who have parents who absolutely refuse to provide their information on the FAFSA. There may not be any unusual circumstances. It may be the mindset that once the student's 18, they're on their own, and if they want to go to college, etc., and the parent is not going to provide any type of information on the FAFSA. That's the case where a student may want to modify the direct unsubsidized loan only question to a yes. The form will start with no already selected. There were so many instances last year, I think students maybe not understanding the question who checked the box yes, and it made lots of students, again, sort of independent, but it makes them eligible for an unsub only loan, and that's not what the student actually wanted. I think we saw in instances of lots of students who check the box thinking, I just want to check a box that makes me eligible for anything I can have, and they weren't really in the situation of having parents who were refusing to complete the form, but then the parent section was not presented. And again, it caused a lot of follow-up work to be done later to fix the situation. When parents don't consent, the student will not see an SAI calculated because they're not going to be eligible for Pell Grant or any of those other kind of things. It is the direct unsubsidized loan only. And as you know, for incoming students, that maximum amount is 5,500. I think, a lot of times we run into conversations with parents who really don't want to put their information on the form. And I think we do need to stress to them that completing the FAFSA is not obligating them to pay for college. It's simply allowing the student to be considered for any federal and state programs they might be eligible for based on family income. So we have to really make sure that people understand also unusual versus special circumstances. We've talked about unusual circumstances. Those are the really harsh situations, and there's an actual question on the form. However, we all know that we deal with a lot of families because this form collects the prior year tax return. They're going to be putting in 2023 information. There could have been changes in the family since then, perhaps a divorce, a death, somebody lost a job. So those are considered special circumstances that really need to take a look at the financial situation of the family. The colleges have to do them each on a case-by-case basis, but unusual circumstances are those drastic situations. Special circumstances are normally some changes in financial situations that the college may need to take a look at. Many colleges will have an appeal form or an income adjustment form. If you have some special circumstances, you may want to have the student reach out to the college and find out exactly what the process is to let the college know that there's been a change in the financial situation of the family. Colleges have the right to collect supporting documentation of these situations. Colleges are required to reach out in cases of provisional independent students, gathering this documentation. And like we said, once they document that they are independent, that will transfer to future years, and hopefully the students won't have to go through the process again. All right, let's talk briefly about parent contributors. We want you to know that it is biological or adoptive parents, regardless of gender, in terms of which parent or parents may belong on the form. People who are grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, step parents, aunts, uncles, brothers, in a sense, are not considered parents on the form, and their information should not be placed on the form. Okay, and whether we need one parent or both parents' information on the form, if both parents are married, and providing support for the student both need to be on there. If the parent is unmarried because they're divorced, separated, or never married, it is the parent who provided the most financial support for the student in the last 12 months. If they're unmarried but living together, then again, both students belong on the form. If the parent is widowed, the other parent's information belongs on the form. Parent contributor FAFSA role, students who start their parents or start the form will invite their parents. They're going to need to know name, birthday, social security number, and email address. For those who do not have a social security number, they have to have the exact street address instead of the social security number. The Who's My Parent tool can be used here. Parents should log in to the FAFSA with their own FSA ID and do their own section of the form. I'm going to turn it over to Missy now, who is going to walk you through actual screenshots from the FAFSA so that you will fully understand what all it takes to complete the form. So Missy, it's all you.
Awesome. Thanks, Morley. Just real quick, I just want to follow up with another reminder. Please continue to use the Q&A section of this. We would love to answer all of your questions. And then the slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted on the OASFAA website. For those who kind of came in late, totally fine, but you'll find the full everything on our OASFAA website. So let's start walking through this FAFSA. So just note, these slides were developed from the FAFSA prototype, so there may have been some changes before the FAFSA opened. As of today, next slide, please. As of today, the FAFSA is open. Yay! So it no longer says coming soon, but students can now begin filling it out. How do they apply? So the ways that students can apply for FAFSA, next slide, please, is the website or the paper FAFSA. We encourage students, paper FAFSA last resort. Try everything that a student can do to get their FSA ID and to complete the form on the website. We know this past year that paper FAFSAs are going to be the last thing that is filed, the last thing that is reported, and so it can delay, and it has severely delayed students' financial aid offers. So I would make sure that the students try to do everything they can to do the website. Next slide, please. Ways to apply, we have it in both English and Spanish for our families who are native Spanish speakers to, again, help them make sure they are completing it correctly. And so we're going to start walking through the FAFSA, and we're going to start on the dependent student scenario, as that's what most students are. So what we really encourage our families to do, though, is to have the student start the FAFSA. We know there were issues last year with the student or the parent starting the FAFSA and inviting the student. It is really important, and to avoid any issues, have the student start the FAFSA, maybe have their parent or guardian kind of standing behind them, so they're doing it together. But again, this is the student's FAFSA, and so it is really important that the students start it. As you can see, that's a landing page, and then we'll move into the login. They will say, I'm starting the form as a student. Yes, it does say they can start it as a parent, but we would highly encourage the students to start it. From there, they will go to login using their email, their FSA ID, and their password that they created. As a reminder, it can take several days to get that FSA ID, typically 3 to 5, so students should have that beforehand. The next one will be student onboarding. So there's going to be a couple videos that the students can walk through. We should encourage them to take the time to watch these videos just so make sure they're understanding kind of what's going on. So the first onboarding is going to be the FAFSA overview. The next one is going to be understanding who's the contributors on the FAFSA. So maybe they didn't do the widget beforehand, but this is going to kind of help them talk about who they are inviting to the FAFSA. The next one will be what to expect on the FAFSA, so they can kind of understand and prepare. And then the next will be, or the final one will be the FAFSA submission summary. So what kind of happens after they submit the FAFSA and what to expect. And so I think these are all very, very helpful for the students. From there, it's going to ask them if they need to update any of the personal information, and if they need to access that under their account settings of the studentaid.gov website. Again, as a big reminder, please, students should not be using their high school email addresses because they typically are going to lose access. The other big thing is that high schools have excellent spam blockers, so they can block out a lot of the emails that might come through for the student. From there, it's going to ask any fields related to the student's mailing address, which they can edit directly on this page. From there, it's going to ask them about their legal state of residence, and they're going to select from the box, and then tell how long they've lived or when they became a legal resident of the state that they're currently living in. From there, it's then going to ask about the consent, or it's going to explain student providing consent, why they would be eligible, why they wouldn't be eligible. So basically providing this consent, the student's federal tax information, if they submitted, if they filed, is going to be imported directly from the IRS, very similar to the parents section. On the next slide here, there is going to be a pop-up that lets the students know that it did come in from the IRS. So it'll say, success, it's been transferred directly. And then the student can click continue to the next slide. Next is going to ask about that personal circumstance. And so students will ask about being a dependent or independent student. From there, it's going to ask about their marital status. And then it's going to ask about their high school or career plans. As students are going through these, it's obviously really easy to kind of just quickly move through them. So we ask the students, make sure they're taking their time, make sure they're selecting the correct box, double check that they've selected the right box. So this one, it's asking about their college or career plans. And so many of your students may have, this is going to be their first year getting their first bachelor's degree. So obviously they're going to put first year. And so they want to make sure that they are answering those questions correctly. And then the next one will be about the student's personal circumstances, which Morley covered a little bit earlier. It's going to ask if any of these apply to the student. This will use skip logic too, so that's helpful as students are navigating. And then the next slide will ask them if they were at risk of being homeless, if they are homeless or at risk. And this is where we have to encourage students, if you know a student that is at risk or is homeless, it's a good time to connect with them and let them know that you're here to support them in this, and that they can use you when colleges are asking for documentation. The next slide then is going to ask about the specific homelessness, is that do they have any of these that can determine the student was homeless or at risk of being homeless. So a lot of times in these scenarios, the school is going to ask for additional documentation. The best documentation they can get is from somebody at their school, whether it's their high school counselor, a school administrator, the homeless liaison, etc. There are a lot of great avenues. The very kind of last thing that we like to see is that financial aid administrator. They can use those of us at the college who work in financial aid, but it really is important to have more than just the financial aid administrator as a part of those conversations and somebody else who knows that student's circumstance. The student will then ask if there's any unusual circumstance that prevents them from contacting the parent. So maybe they've never had contact. I've had students who've had their parents' phone number, but they've never really been in contact. That is fine. Maybe it's unhealthy environment for them. There's a multitude of different reasonings. And if they have questions about this as well, this is also a good time to connect with you or even the schools in which they're applying. From here, as we mentioned, if they answer yes to the questions, it's going to consider the student provisionally independent. And of course, they're going to want to connect with their college's financial aid office, but it is really important that they kind of know about this going in, and that they consider hopefully you or another school administrator, somebody that kind of walks alongside them from here. With this though, as we mentioned, they're going to get that provisional SAI. And then they'll be able to kind of move forward and just get additional documentation. This, again, as we mentioned, is the infamous question 8, as we have talked about, where students may be parent unwilling to provide any information. And as a reminder, they only get direct unsubsidized loans. They are not eligible for any additional aid from the colleges or universities in which they apply. The nice thing about this is there is a pop-up box that kind of alerts them, like, if you click yes, this is not going to, you will not be eligible for any additional aid other than the unsub loans. On the next slide, it's going to then ask the student to tell us about their parents. So this is what's really great about this is they could use that parent widget beforehand to kind of help guide this, but it'll walk through a series of yes or no questions here. The next slide here is the dependent students will need to know their parent name, social security number, if applicable, and the date of birth. Hence why we encourage the parent to sit with the student as they're going through this. I always encourage families to make sure you have the social security card with you so that way everything matches and you're not trying to remember everything off the top of your head. On this next slide, it's talking a little bit more about the parent that's going to be invited, the parent spouse or the partner, including a step parent. And then there is the box that says my parent doesn't have a social security number, again, to help with the student with that. On the next one, it's going to talk a little bit more about inviting. So it'll say, this is who I'm inviting directly. This is who I'm also inviting, and the student can see who they're inviting. And then that parent will get an email to them, which is great. From there, the student is going to ask some demographics. The student will be able to see what they enter on this, so nobody else will see it. These questions are really only for research purposes only. The schools and colleges do not receive this information. This is really just used for research purposes to see who has filed the FAFSA. So it's going to ask about the gender. It's going to ask about a student's race and ethnicity. Students do have the option to opt out. And then from there, they're going to be asked about their citizenship status. And again, these are totally optional. The student's going to be asked about parents' educational status. So again, that's helpful. And then here we're talking about parents are killed in the line of duty. It does give some pop-ups, so that way there's some help text so students know and understand from here as well. Next, it's going to ask about student school completion status. So they can ask here, or say here what is going to be, what they'll graduate. Next slide, it's going to talk about the high school information. So they'll start by asking the state. Then they'll look up the high school and select their high school on there. On the next slide, it's really important for students to confirm so they list out, so it comes out on the FAFSA correctly. So verify everything, and then they're going to ask about finances. From there, the student is going to input any of their information about, it's going to ask questions about their 2023 tax return, and the students are going to answer in here. As a reminder, if a student does have an IRA, they do not need to include, or like a retirement account, they don't include that information on here. But if they did have a rollover for whatever reason, they'd put that in here. So just make sure that they are answering these correctly. And then on the next slide, it is going to ask about the student's assets. So families that meet all of these following criteria will not have to report assets. So if they have an AGI of less than 60,000, they don't file one of those many lettered schedules, and they do not file a Schedule C or file a form that has a net business gain or loss of $10,000 or less. Student will always answer these questions if they start the form because we don't have the family AGI. Again, it is important though that student does start it just so we avoid any glitches with the system with the parent starting it. These answers are not used in the SAA calculation if the above criteria are met. And then from here, it's going to ask about the colleges and careers section. So it's going to ask, you can select up to 20 schools. You can list them out here. Hopefully students have a good number. If they do have more than 20, there is the option, students can kind of add and remove schools, but they want to confirm with the college first whether they've received their data before they remove. The students will be able to see which colleges and careers, and then when they select continue, they have completed entering the required student information from their section, and that's when they'll proceed to the review and sign. Again, they have the option to review. I'd encourage them to click all the drop downs, make sure they're going through everything here and understanding what's going on. Dependent students can see the parent contributor section and the status of their parent's invite, which is really nice, but they won't be able to see the parent information. So as you can see here, it's like I added my parent then and I sent them in the invitation. If they need to change their contributor for whatever reason, they can manage it there as well. And then they are going to review and sign it. So again, make sure they review it and make sure they sign it. They'll click and they'll click sign. And then it will have the parent and they'll say, you're almost there, right? The student section is complete. Now it's time for the parent if they are a dependent student. So from there, we jump into the parent selection. And so the parent is going to receive an invitation. They'll be able to log in, kind of gives them a little heads up there that if you don't do this, your student won't be able to be eligible for financial aid. They are going to also then log in using their FSA ID and password. And then it's going to have them accept or decline the information. Hopefully they will be accepting that section. And then it's going to start asking, it's going to give them kind of the same understanding of what is the FAFSA, etc. Under the parent section, it's going to ask them to confirm their identity. So date of birth, last four of the social, phone number, all of this stuff, their parent address, the mailing address there. And then it's going to say that they provide consent to link their data with the IRS. So if they decline this, again, that means the student won't be eligible for any federal aid and highly unlikely to be any eligible for any institutional aid at schools as well. So hopefully they click approve. It says success. We've imported your information. They'll click continue, and then it'll ask for parent demographic information. So going to ask about the parent marital status. And it'll invite, if we need to invite a parent or spouse to it, this is where they can do it at this time as well. Just as a reminder, if you're filed married, joint, only one parent technically needs to sign the FAFSA. If they're filed married separate, both parents will need to file the FAFSA. If parent is remarried and they filed married joint, then parent and step parent will need to be on the FAFSA, or will need a FAFSA FSA ID. They'll need one, but the step parent tax information will be on. If they filed married separate, both the parent and the step parent will need to have FSA IDs as well. And then they're going to ask about the parent state of legal residence. And then they'll ask about the finances here. This is where they're just going to ask about any federal benefits that you may receive as the parent or family. Then we're going to talk about family size, which is what Morley also talked about earlier. So is this different from the taxes? And again, you'll see that and you can update that if needed. And then from there, this information is not going to be used in the SAI calculation, is the number in college. So that is not part of the formula anymore, but I will put in a reminder that there was an increase in asset protection for the family size included in the SAI as well. Some schools may use that information when awarding financial aid or institutional aid, but it will not affect the SAI. It cannot affect the SAI. Under this parent section, it's going to ask about the tax return information here. And then very similar to the students. And then it's going to ask, the next slide is going to ask about any of the annual child support received, assets, current net worth of investments. Now remember, it's not the home that you live in. And then as well as you do not need to include your full retirement in there as well. If you have a retirement, I would not put your retirements in there. So the next slide is then just a review. Again, double checking everything. If there is an additional contributor that needs to be added, you'll see it down there below. And then it's going to ask for the signature. Again, signing and submitting. And then, yay, you're almost there. And then it's done, which is hopefully what the student sees. So the next slide is then going to talk about the FAFSA submission summary. So the student will have access to the FAFSA submission summary, the parent will not. So it will tell the student what their student aid index is. You'll see the little tabs at the top there that says eligibility overview. The FAFSA form answers the school information, the next steps. School information will see what schools they've applied to or sent that to. FAFSA form answers, you'll see the answers. And then the next steps, if there are anything that's indicated that they need, it will be included in the next steps there. It is really important that students keep an eye out on that. So just a couple other FAFSA information and reminders. Independent students will only complete the student section and only invite a spouse if they're married. Processing should begin immediately upon submission this year. It may take a couple of days for it to get to the colleges, but it should be processed by the federal government upon submission. Any student involved in beta testing may have already completed their FAFSA, and they can go in and make corrections as needed. We are told again this year that corrections are readily available after submission. Watch for any changing FAFSA or priority deadlines and dates from your colleges. So it's really important. I encourage my students to always create a spreadsheet so they know. And then FAFSA submission summary should be available as soon as the FAFSA is processed. So it might not be an immediate where they click submit and then they get that FAFSA submission summary. It may take 1 to 3 days after submission because, right, it goes to the federal government, they process it, and then the student gets that FAFSA submission summary. It is Morley's turn. And just as one quick reminder, please continue to use the question and answer portion of our webinar so that way we can answer your questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Misty. That was a lot of information you covered there, walking them through the form. Just a couple other things to remind you. You've heard us use the term SAI. That has replaced the EFC, or expected family contribution. So this will be our second year with the SAI. The FAFSA submission summary is the new name for the student aid report, or the SAR. So we have SAIs and FAFSA submission summaries now. The family size is aligned with the number of exemptions on the form, but there's a question to modify that if it needs to be. The word contributor has replaced the word parent throughout the form. All contributors have to have an FSA ID, and they have to provide the consent. The offer of financial assistance has replaced estimated financial assistance. Sometimes you'll hear those phrases. The cost of attendance elements have to appear anywhere on the website that talks about the cost of school. The department can now regulate the cost of attendance. In other words, they could have some input to the institutions. I don't think we saw too many examples of that. Books, course materials, supplies, and equipment include a reasonable allowance for the rental or use of a personal computer. Room and board is now called food and housing. Transportation in a cost of attendance may include transportation to and from a student's workplace. And loan fees will only be included for federal student loans in that cost of attendance. Remember that this new student aid index formula, it reduces the number of items, income items and allowances that used to be asked on the form. It changes items included in the assets because child support received is in assets now. They also have to report small business and farm net values. There was a change in how the family size was calculated, and in the formula removed the consideration for the number in college. Remember that SAIs can be negative. They can go all the way down to negative 1,500. And then colleges no longer have the ability to prorate an SAI. If you have a student who's maybe only going to go one semester, they're getting ready to finish up and graduate after fall term, they may only have one term of a cost of attendance, but the SAI cannot be adjusted for a prorated amount of time. The FAFSA submission summary that Missy kind of ran through is going to be a summary of all those questions that they submitted and all the answers that they provided. It's going to have the eligibility overview. It's going to have an estimation of their Pell Grant and maybe student loans, etc. The student will see information about when their form was received and processed. So that's important for making sure deadline dates, and they can print that copy of the FAFSA submission summary to keep for their records. We do want to just point out that we do have students who are applying to some highly competitive institutions in most cases, and they may need a form beyond the FAFSA. They may need the form referred to as the CSS profile. The profile opened October 1, as when the FAFSA was supposed to. We have very limited number of colleges in Ohio who want that form. Maybe students have already got that completed and we're simply waiting for the FAFSA. Some folks wait and do them both at the same time, but need to make sure that they're meeting deadline dates. And so Case Western College of Worcester, Denison, Kenyon, and Oberlin are the primary colleges that require that for the incoming students. Talking a little bit about federal aid programs, just a reminder, the Pell Grant, which is the sort of the cornerstone of all federal grants, and the Teach Grant for our students who may be considering education as a major. There are campus-based programs, which are going to be your SEOG and work study, and then, of course, the student loans. The Pell Grant for this year is $7,395. We don't know the amount for next year or what Congress will do for the 25-26 year. Students can only have the Pell Grant basically for the equivalent of 12 full-time semesters or 6 years. They can go year-round and receive Pell Grant. The Teach Grant is, the amount is $4,000, but there's a fee, a sequestration fee. So the amount that they actually end up with is $3,772. Remember that the Teach Grant has strings attached to it in terms of students teaching in high need economic and high need subject areas. And if they don't meet that requirement, then the Teach Grant turns to a loan and interest accrues from the first day that they took the Teach Grant. So those that get offered that hopefully are 100% certain about their chosen career. The SEOG, oftentimes an additional grant offered to the neediest students on campus. It can range from anywhere from 100 to 4,000. We certainly see SEOG amounts being much smaller than $4,000 in most students' packages. Often to get a campus-based program like this, the student has to meet the priority deadline date that the college had established for getting FAFSA submitted. Also, federal work study is a campus-based program. You know that can be an employment on or off campus if they have a contract with an off-campus agency. The minimum wage, $10.45 an hour. So, you know, the question about being interested in work study was not on the FAFSA, so colleges will use different things to determine who gets offered college work study. Work study earnings are given in the form of a paycheck. They're not normally applied to a student's bill. And again, making sure they have their FAFSA in by a priority deadline date to determine their eligibility should be considered. When we talk about the student loans for our undergraduate students, there are two types, subsidized and unsubsidized. Our subsidized loans indicate that they're need-based. It has an interest rate this year of 6.53%. The interest is subsidized while the student's in school, so it's not accruing, and they have a very tiny loan fee taken away from the amount of loan. Unsubsidized is not need-based. Literally any student can qualify that doesn't have financial need. Again, same interest rate, but the interest does, for unsubsidized, begin to accrue from the point in time that the student borrows. Okay, just a reminder about the amounts. Our incoming students can borrow up to $5,500 once they're considered a sophomore, $6,500 once they reach junior status. They can borrow $7,500. Undergraduate independent students and dependent students whose parents have been denied a PLUS loan are eligible for some additional unsub loan, $4,000 as a freshman and sophomore, and $5,000 for juniors and seniors. So if you have a student in that situation who wants to apply for a PLUS loan and their parent is denied, they may also be eligible for additional loan funds. The PLUS loan, as we were just talking about, is a loan that the parent borrows. So it's for parents of dependent students. There is not an annual limit. It's going to be based on a mathematical problem of the cost of attendance minus any aid the student is receiving. The parent can borrow up every dollar up to that difference. Their interest rate is higher at 9.08%, and their loan fees are higher. And repayment for this loan begins 60 days after full disbursement. So if a parent borrows a freshman year, the first disbursement comes fall term, the second disbursement comes in January of spring term, 60 days later, which basically would probably mean some point in time in March, repayment for those folks would begin immediately for PLUS loan borrowers. Our Ohio aid programs, our biggest one, most well-known Ohio College Opportunity Grant, that is our need-based grant here in Ohio. We have Ohio War Orphans, we have Ohio Safety Officers, Ohio National Guard, Nurse Education, and Choose Ohio. Many of these programs have been around for lots and lots of years. The Ohio College Opportunity Grant, have to be an Ohio resident, have to be enrolled in a eligible degree granting program, and your SAI cannot be higher than 3,750, and the household income combined cannot exceed 96,000. If the student has a 3,750 or less SAI and an income of less than 96,000, and they're enrolled at the right type of institution, they will be eligible for OCOG. The amounts this year, if they were enrolled at a 4-year public main campus, $4,000. Private schools, nonprofit, up to $5,000. In proprietary schools, students were eligible for $2,500. These are just reminders. The Ohio War Orphans, to children of deceased or severely disabled Ohio veterans, Ohio safety officers, for folks, unfortunately, who had a parent, firefighter, etc., killed in the line of duty, and Ohio National Guard, money available for those that are members. The Nursing Education Assistance Loan Program, fairly self-explanatory for our folks that are going to head down the nursing path. Choose Ohio First are actually funds that are awarded to the institutions, and it's not technically using the FAFSA. Institutions will have a variety of ways that they will identify who may be eligible for Choose Ohio First. Safety officers covers 100% of tuition at public. Ohio National Guard's 100%. Ohio Orphans is 79% at public colleges, and then the amount of 6618 at private. Nursing education loan, if they're in the RN program, 1650, and nurse educators, $6,000 a year. There are some of these that require additional things to do beyond filing the FAFSA. As I said, Choose Ohio First, the institutions will be doing the selection here. Safety officers, students have to submit an eligibility document. War Orphans, NELP, and Ohio National Guard, there are some supplemental applications that the student has to do. Ohio National Guard, you've got to be in there, and NELP, you must complete 4 years of postgraduate employment in Ohio. Where some relatively new programs, the Governor's Merit Scholarship, Ohio Work Ready Grant, College Adoption Grant, and Grow Your Own Teacher Scholarship. The Governor's Merit one, many of you are probably familiar with, up to $5,000 a year, renewable for 4 years. Students who are in the Ohio residents in the top 5% of their class and enroll at a qualifying institution. So that is, in a sense, merit money for our students. The Work Ready Grant provides to Ohio residents who demonstrate levels of financial need. Students have to enroll in an eligible institution. College Adoption Grants provides a one-time grant to eligible adoptees who are Ohio residents, and then Grow Your Own Teacher Scholarship provides financial assistance to low-income students in eligible teaching preparation programs who agree to teach in qualifying high-need K-12 schools after graduating. The amount of the Work Ready Grant varies by institution. The College Adoption Grant is $2,500, and the Grow Your Own can be up to $7,500. These new aid programs, the Ohio Work Ready, you'll have to check and see if the institution has it. There's a supplemental application for the College Adoption and the Grow Your Own. And the Grow Your Own has to complete 4 years of employment in partnering primary or secondary schools as a result of that. You can scan this QR code, take a picture of it. This is a place where you can find information on all of the Ohio programs. So there are a lot of them. We've added a lot recently, so a lot more to learn and remember all the nuances about to help your students. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Missy, who's going to talk to you about award letters and financial aid notifications. So Missy, you're up again.
Fantastic. Thanks, Morley. So here we're going to talk about the financial aid notifications that the students will receive after they have filed their FAFSA with the different schools. So the first slide here is going to talk about what financial aid offers are, right? They're just a document that outlines the amounts and details of financial aid that is being offered to the student. It is provided by each post-secondary institution that the student has listed on the FAFSA, and it's to cover one academic year. So it could be mailed, emailed, posted on the self-service portal, maybe all of the above. but some things that the students should consider and some things that are actually required to be on this financial aid offer is the annual costs such as tuitions, fees, books, food and housing, transportation expenses, etc. It's going to cover under the cost of attendance here. We've provided a couple examples that look a little bit different. Again, each school is going to do it a little bit differently, but it is always going to provide that cost of attendance. And then financial aid students can expect to receive. So in the left part here, you're going to see the estimated annual cost of attendance. So you'll see tuition, general fees, on-campus housing, on-campus food. If they are, and those usually say if they're a residential student or a commuter student. And then they are now required to include loan origination fees. And then there's also a certificate fee it's a certificate kind of cost that's going into that cost of attendance as well. A lot of schools might say what their scholarships and grants for this fall and the spring are, any student loan eligibility, and any student employment opportunities included in there. So you'll see the start, and then you'll see kind of what the cost is. In this example aid offer, it's showing the direct costs, which are billed directly to the student, the indirect costs, and then that estimated cost of attendance. Expenses are broken into direct and indirect. So direct is tuition, fees, housing, a meal plan if they're required to have that. Indirect are things that the students are not billed for, like books, transportation, and additional miscellaneous expenses. And so the first thing that we in addition, it's also going to talk and separate out like gift aid and self-help aid options as well. So to make sure that students are looking for that. Some schools can kind of combine them into kind of one section, but some might split them out as well. So you'll see on here, it talks about scholarships that a student might receive, and then any additional grants in terms of federal or state grants or institutional grants. And then kind of that bottom box just talks about that self-help aid, which is any loan options, any work study options as well, and just kind of going through. They are required to kind of give this clear cost of attendance for 1 year as required by the government. So then what we encourage our students to really do when they're looking at their financial aid offers, and we often encourage them to go to their high school counselors to kind of talk through a lot of these, because you guys are also the experts as well, but we encourage them to isolate that cost of attendance as best you can, or what is the direct billable cost for a student. So as you can see, it says total estimated billed charges. On this one, it's going to take out those total scholarships and grants, any estimated aid before federal student loans. Here they've broken that out. And then it says your estimated balance after those federal student loans. So you can see what the balance would be before, or if they choose to take out those student loans. What it is, just note what are the real costs and what are the estimated costs as well. So below you can kind of see a breakdown here for students when it comes to the estimated cost. In the second step, we want to encourage them to identify any scholarships and grants. So if it says scholarship or grant, that's usually free money that we remind the students that does not need to be paid back. Some schools will identify that this is gift aid, which is great. That's the free money we want our students to have. The next step you'll want to do is factor in any federal loans or federal work study that the student will have. So on the next slide, we'll show you kind of how to identify those. It will say available federal work study. Some schools will call it university funded employment. If a student's not eligible for federal work study, many schools offer that university study, college or campus study, campus work study, etc. And then factor in any federal loans and federal work study or university work study. Please remind the student that while they are eligible for that $5,500, there is that 1% origination fee. So it does take off about $55 off the top of that loan as that origination fee. So it's like $5,442, I believe, is like directly applied to the students. So it's not that full $5,500. In step 4, that work study and credit-based loan option. So it'll kind of talk about it there. In that if they have an option for a Parent Plus loan or a private education loan. One thing to note too is when students are talking to schools about work study or campus-based options, many schools, it is just a direct deposit to the student. It's not applied to their tuition, but some schools can do it that way. So they do want to contact their schools in which they're applying and they've received that kind of university-funded employment or the federal work study to ask them directly, is this paid directly to me every 2 weeks, like a kind of a normal job direct deposit, or is this applied to my education or applied directly to my tuition? So we do have really great resources on our OASFAA website. So we would highly encourage you to take a look at those. You can scan this QR code, but we have a really great cost comparison worksheet for our students as well. So please, counselors, feel free to use that to help your students kind of identify and talk through the different educational expenses. I always encourage students to never completely write off a school before they've seen the full financial aid offers. And so as we're wrapping up, we're going to talk a little bit more about the resources that we have available to you as counselors to help your students navigate this financial aid process. So OASFAA is here to help serve you guys. And so you just go to oasfa.org/counselors. You can request a financial aid night presenter to come and present to your families to talk a little bit more about this. You could put yourself in our counselor database and we will send you important training and resource notices. You can, this is a counselor workshop, but every year we do host counselor workshops at a site near you all across the state. I think we've held about 20 this year. So if keep that in mind, we do host them every year. So next year, as you're gearing up, or maybe you have new staff coming in, this is a really good opportunity for them to learn about this. Their presentation is almost identical to this one that you will receive on site. And then there's, again, some additional resource and documents available. So again, you can kind of see what's on our OASFAA website here, any information that students need or that families or counselors that you need. We kind of have linked it all here. There is that financial aid estimator directly on the FAFSA website that students can use, and it kind of walks you through everything here. The next slide, again, is just some more federal resources. So again, using that financial aid estimator, this can provide that family with an estimated SAI. There's the FAFSA prototype, which provides those users with the online practical experience of completing a FAFSA. So counselors, if you want to walk through and see exactly what it is, you can use the prototype. And then the biggest one that we obviously encourage is the Who's My Parent tool that is now broken out from the FAFSA. Last year it was embedded, but now it's kind of broken out and it's a standalone feature. And that would be really helpful for our families who need to determine who's my parent on the FAFSA. So as we kind of wrap up our final thoughts, just as a reminder, it's opened on November 21st, about 10 days before they said it would, which is great. I encourage students to get their FAFSA or their FSA ID and then encourage them to start filing it, excuse me. Really support the students and their families with that creation of the FSA ID. Remember, if you're going to host a FAFSA workshop, make sure it is explicit that a FSA ID needs to be created in advance and at least 5 days beforehand. So that way, right, any person that gets that FAFSA ID or FSA ID, it needs to be done 3 to 5 days in advance before they start the FAFSA, because there does need a verification that needs to come through. And then talking to your students, starting to identify any special or unusual circumstances. Remember, they're different. Unusual circumstances has to deal with the student and kind of their independent status. A special circumstance is anything that kind of is financially different from the 23 taxes, or that something that maybe is not taken into account that comes to the SAI in terms of their finances. We do ask that you let us know how you felt about our workshop here. We do take all your feedback into account, and it helps us next year as we are working through and determining the counselor workshop. We know that is a long workshop here that we do, but it is really important to us that you guys are able to see everything. We're able to walk it through with you and everything like that. So, because Morley and I are such fast talkers and we do, such a great job here, we do have plenty of time to start talking through, answering any questions that you may have. So please continue to use that Q&A section, and we'll kind of do a little moderator. I think Emily will pop on here, and we will be happy to answer any questions that you drop in that Q&A. We'll also answer some of the frequently asked questions that we had here as well. So
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Missy. I went back to the QR codes for the counselor workshop survey, so hopefully I leave that up there for a while we answer questions so everybody can get a chance to scan it and provide feedback for us. So Missy and I want to say thank you to Emily and Leanne who have been on here answering your questions throughout the presentation. We did talk really fast. And so we are going to ask Emily and Leanne to pose to us any questions that they saw during there that we need to perhaps let the whole group hear the answer to. You can continue to put your questions in the Q&A box and we will answer anything you have. They can be about the presentation today, or they can be general financial aid questions. We are happy to tackle any of those that you may have. So Emily or Leanne, not sure which one of you wants to pose a question. Emily, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm glad that we've gotten a little extra time to answer some questions. So, first question I just wanted to just talk about is, will the slide deck be available for review? So the slide deck and the presentation we are recording will be available. It'll be on the counselor resources page of the OASFAA website. Give us a couple of days to get that up and going, but those will be available on the counselor resource page. All right. A couple other things. I know we talked about with the FSA ID, and I know that both Missy and Morley talked about it, but there is kind of a waiting period to have the information verified. And so you won't have access to all of the features of the FAFSA when completing it. So you do want to have your families go ahead and get those FSA IDs completed before they start the FAFSA. That way they can use all of the wonderful features of the online FAFSA and don't have to take any extra time or answer extra questions. So it does take about 3 to 5 days to get verified. And so just want to put that out there for the whole team here. All right, let's see what else. So do both parents need an FSA ID or just does one parent work? So this is an it depends question. So if the student's parents are married and they file their taxes jointly, then only one parent will need to be a contributor. But again, just remember we're working with taxes from 2 years ago. And so some families do go back and forth between filing jointly and separately. So we always recommend that everyone in the both parents create an FSA ID. So if the other parent does need it or both parents end up needing it, then that is available to the student.
Emily, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of, I know I briefly covered it too, and I think Morley did there as well. We'll just kind of, as a blanket reminder that if you are filing married joint, then typically only one parent needs to be on the FAFSA. You can have both, obviously, but because the tax information is both parents on there, only one has to give consent. If you're filed married separate, then both parents will be required to both be provide consent because you filed separately. And then if your parents are separated or divorced, so they don't have to be legally separated, but if they are separated, then the parent who provides that more financial support in the last 12 months is the parent who is the parent of consent on the FAFSA. So hopefully that kind of provided some clarity there. Step parents, that's another question we get. Step parents, if the parent that they're living or that is providing the most financial support over the last 12 months is remarried and they filed married joint, then just the one parent needs to. But the step parents information will be on the FAFSA. That is a requirement, even if they are not contributing or they say they're not paying for their stepchild's education, because that family unit is providing the most financial support to the student, that information still does need to be on the FAFSA. Again, if they're married separate, both the parent and step-parent will need to be on the FAFSA there. So I think those are important clarifications. Morley, did I miss anything? Because I know there's like several anomalies.
No, I mean, I think Emily started off correctly. It depends. It really depends on the situation. You know, and that's why using that parent, who's my parent tool ahead of time can really help understand whether we have one or both parents who need an FSA ID. But you know, the good news is married filing jointly, technically only one needs to log in, grant consent, fill out the form, fill in the demographic information about the name of the other parent, but that person doesn't have to log in and grant consent because the first parent already did that. So, you know, this can be confusing. And did we have students last year who put one parent in and then had to go in when they could make corrections and back that parent off and put a different parent in? You know, that you know, may have to happen if they put the wrong parent on. The difference this year with the forms, you know, being up and being processed immediately as they're being submitted. You know, last year there was a multi-month break, kind of a black hole between when a FAFSA was submitted and it was April before you could make corrections. Now you're going to be able to make corrections in 1 to 3 days. So if something went wrong, you can go back in and get the form fixed and make sure you have the right parent contributing on the form. Emily, do we have other questions that came in?
We do. So we have several questions that deal with custody and guardianship and how a student should move forward if they are in one of those situations.
Okay.
Um,
I can take a stab at
Sure.
that. So remember, as I said, there is a difference between legal custody and legal guardianship. Legal guardianship is a formal process in which there's paperwork associated, and the word guardianship is used on there, and the student has been assigned a legal guardian. Usually happens to prior age 18 for the student, and then once the student turns 18, many legal guardianship papers sort of indicate that the guardianship ended. But if you read the question, it said anytime after age 13 was the student in a legal guardianship. And so if they were, they would answer yes. Legal custody is somewhat different. There are many reasons why someone may have custody of a student, but not necessarily full legal guardianship. And so if the situation the student is in is that somebody, you know, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, somebody has been granted some temporary custody of the student. Number one, whoever that is, if as long as it's not a parent, their information does not belong on the form. The student would still need to answer those dependency questions. They would say no to the guardianship question because this is legal custody. That student is then considered dependent, and the parent that provided the most support in the most recent 12 months is whose information may need to go on the form. Sometimes that situation is very touchy in certain situations, depending on what led to the custody. We've seen cases where somebody was granted custody when the student was born and the parents have actually never been involved in the whole situation. That may, something as special as that may be the situation where you would want to contact the financial aid office and talk about filing a dependency appeal so that that student really could be considered independent. So it honestly, it's another question where it starts, the answer starts with, it depends on exactly what the situation is.
Yeah, I would echo that. At my institution, I work with my financial aid office to do all of our incoming first year kind of dependency overrides. As I remind students too, when it comes to that, like this information is confidential between myself, you, and either your school administrator or somebody that you trust. And so just know that we're here to help you in that kind of and walk alongside you in this. And so any information, right, that we receive is confidential. And we do treat this with the utmost of care because we also know that it's a difficult situation for a lot of students. So as you go back through in our slides, we do kind of mention some of these so you guys can go back, kind of have those on the ready for the student as well, I think is super helpful.
Great. Thank you, Missy. Emily, more questions?
So we've had a request or a couple of requests to talk about students with mixed family status and how we can support our students, or should eligible students with undocumented parents, how we need to move forward with those students.
Okay. So the guidelines indicate that students who have contributors without social security numbers, the federal process indicates that they need to set up an FSA ID. They can do it without having a social security number. They will get posed some questions by TransUnion. If they answer those correctly, their FSA ID would be immediately verified. If not, they would get an email indicating they've been sent to a manual identity verification process. That is the process that has been waived for 25-26. And so, as I said earlier, we recommend that if that's the situation they land in, that they don't really submit any documents even at this point, because it's been waived for this entire cycle. So we will take a wait and see approach. I will say that this topic has come up a lot recently. It's, in a sense, it started last spring when contributors without social security numbers could start to set up FSA IDs. We've been asked a lot of questions about privacy protections for the financial aid database. There is legal language that database, as of today, can only be used for the application and processing of federal student aid. I think everyone is kind of aware of the situation, and we're about to change administrations. And so what we can tell you is, as of today, that's the way it operates. I think no one is in the position of being able to guarantee what happens when there's a new administration. So I think our strong advice to folks would just be, for those that this may be the first time you're filing, is to make sure you consider all aspects of the process. And for those that do not have social security numbers, they may want to make a decision about whether they would like to enter their information into a federal database that for now is protected, but we are not confident or sure what will happen when the administration changes.
If I could follow up with that too, I would encourage you at your school to start in conversations with your administration about how you, if you have a high population of students who are in these special circumstances, to connect with your administration and develop a process with how you will advise your students within your school. I would also encourage you to partner with maybe a local trusted university that you've maybe partnered with, and see how they are also going to be kind of moving forward with this. I know at my university, we are in conversations about this. We are all aware. And so there are different conversations that are being had at the university level as well. And so maybe partnering with, in addition to your administration, maybe partnering and talking to your local universities or colleges that you do have that good partnership with, it would be something important for you maybe to develop that.
Thanks, Missy. Other questions, Emily?
Let's see. We did have a question about what parents and students can see as far as what students can see for parent answers and vice versa.
Missy, you want to go ahead and take that
Sure.
one? That was, yeah.
Yeah, I can take that. So the students able kind of to see their section, they will not be able to see the parental information that is provided, which is so like especially the parental financial information. I know that is a concern. So that they won't be able to see that. The parents will not be able to see what the SAI is, what schools the student has submitted. That is all of the student section, and anything the financial, the FAFSA submission summary. There it is. That is also that only the student will be able to see. So they're not able to kind of see everything back and forth, but it is they'll be able to kind of see that the parent completed their side of it, or the student completed their side of it, but they won't be able to see the information from there.
Yeah, I'll just throw in a little clarity there in that, and sort of a lot of Missy's answer was about, in a sense, while they're inside the FAFSA, right? The student can't just click over to the parent section and see what the parent, sent in. However, once the form is processed and the student has the access to the FAFSA submission summary, it will contain all the questions, student and parent, and all the answers that were provided. But let me also be very clear. None of the information that transferred from the IRS can be seen by anyone. The student can never see it. The parent can never see it. They can't see each other's. So literally none of that is available for anyone to see. Like Missy said, you just can't. The IRS is not going to put that out in print in the FAFSA submission summary or up on the screens or anything else. So the sort of the concept behind the student being able to see parent stuff, but the parent not being able to see the student, is this is technically the student's FAFSA. And so they own all the information in it, which is why they can kind of, once the summary comes out, see both things, but the parent I mean, obviously if the student hands the FAFSA, prints it and hands it over to their parent can certainly see what the student typed in and everything else. But in terms of online, they can't just jump back and forth in between sections and things like that without the student logging in as the student or the parent logging in as the parent, etc.
Great, thank you. All right, two more questions have come up, and we're talking about the identity verification for parents who do not have a social security number, and what will be waived exactly. I know the waiver process is still in process for 25-26, but what is actually being waived?
The part that's being waived, and federal student aid did this actually was like April 30th or May 1st for the 24-25 cycle. They came out and announced the identity verification process would be waived. So for those people without a social security number who set up an FSA ID, after they get all their demographic information in, et cetera, they're presented with some TransUnion questions, right, to help verify their identity. If they answer those correctly, their FSA ID is verified immediately. If for some reason they weren't presented the questions or they didn't get the questions answered correctly, they're going to get a notification that they're going to have to go through a manual identity process, which meant filling out an attestation form and providing copies of certain documents like copies of passports or driver's licenses, things like that, that had to be submitted to federal student aid to be reviewed to confirm and verify their identity. That process of completing an attestation form and submitting documentation has been waived. It was waived back in early May. It was waived for the entire 24-25 FAFSA cycle. And federal student aid announced over the summer that it would also be waived for the entire 25-26. So they do have to set up their FSA ID. They do have to attempt to answer the TransUnion questions. But if they do not get them correct and they get the email that gives them instructions about documents to submit and things like that, they do not have to do that process. They will have immediate access to the FAFSA. However, anybody whose ID has not been verified will have to enter all their financial information manually. They will not be transferring. They'll have to grant the consent box. They'll have to check that box, but nothing is coming over from the IRS for them. So they will have to manually enter their financial information throughout the form.
Great. All right. Another question that's come up. So both of the students' parents have passed. The student is living with grandma. What information do we enter for any parent information?
Sure, I have the slide right up here. So I believe it was like slide 39 on our on the presentation. So if you want to go back and look, it'll say parent contributors, and the next slide will be, so the FAFSA defines a legal parent or the contributor as the biological or adoptive parent or as determined by the state. So if a parent is listed on the birth certificate, grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, widowed step parents, aunts, uncles, and siblings are not considered parents on the FAFSA unless they've legally adopted the student. So contributor parent is the parent, biological parent or adoptive parent, and then grandparents, if they have not legally adopted the student, then there's that. If they have a legal guardianship, that is, so the funny thing is the state of Ohio uses legal guardianship and custody kind of interchangeably, but the federal government does not. So it needs to say legal guardianship but that is a question that they would do. A legal guardianship still is an independent student. So if student is living with parent or grandparents, they've not legally adopted them, the information's not in the FAFSA. Morley, is there anything that I need to follow up there?
I think to the indication, if I heard the beginning of the question, both parents may have passed away. And so the orphan question, if it happened after the student was 13, they can answer yes to the orphan question, and everything Missy just said is exactly right. That grandparent information doesn't belong on the form. There may be, if they do indicate that they are an orphan, there are times where institutions may come out and ask for some confirmation. They may need to submit copies of death certificates or things like that to the institution to verify that they are an orphan. So, they may want to begin to kind of get that paperwork together, but they can answer yes that they're an orphan. We don't want grandma's information anywhere on the form, one way or the other.
And if there is an error at any point, like students can update FAFSA contributors, but then also you can reach out to the school, their universities that they're applying, and they can also kind of help identify that as well too. Use us as your resources as well, right? Universities, as colleges, we're really here to partner with you and your students in this journey. So we will work alongside you guys. Our goal is to get the students the most money that they possibly can. So we want to help with that. Any final questions? All right. All right, well, thank you everybody for hanging out with us. We really enjoyed talking you through the FAFSA. We know that there are a lot of changes. We know there are a lot of updates. So please refer to our OASFAA website. We've got a lot of opportunities there. Sign up for our newsletter and our resources. And again, really work with your colleges and universities. They want to partner with you in this, partner with your students. At my university, I'm always accessible, always willing to talk to students as well as my entire staff. And I know everyone at all the other institutions that we work with at OASFAA, they really do want to make sure that this is as simple, easy, as painless as possible for your students. So, Morelli.
Yeah, the last thing is, well, thank you for attending. We really appreciate it. Glad you were able to join us. We will mention if you are in the need of a certificate of attendance for this event, please email us at outreach@oasfa.org and make sure we have your full name, and we will reply to your email and attach the certificate of attendance if that is something you need. So again, thank you for being with us today. We wish you a good week and happy Thanksgiving if you're celebrating. And we're going to need to let you go because it's time to go help students with FAFSAs. That form is open. Let's get FAFSAs done. So let's have a race to see how many we can do before we break for the holiday in December. So let's go FAFSA. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.